Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to talk to you today about our CoreCHI certification exam and share the insights that would help you understand how the exam was constructed, what it consists of, and how you can prepare for it. My name is Natalia Mitrieva. I'm a CoreCHI certificate myself. I'm also an executive director of the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters. Uh, a few words about the exam development and the reason for it, and then we will dive into the content of the exam. Well, first of all, the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, CCHI, is a national organization that administers valid, credible, and vendor-neutral certification programs. We're very excited to be the only certifying body for interpreters that has certification programs accredited by third party. And in the testing industry, that third party is called the National Commission for Certifying Agencies, or NCCA. The accreditation belongs to a program, not to the organization. However, in the accreditation process, the whole organization is evaluated as well. And we're very excited that we were one of the pioneers of seeking accreditation, and currently are the only entity, and our CoreCHI certification is accredited by NCCA as a standalone certification. And as you will learn today, that the part of that certification is actually the exam, right? And that CoreCHI exam that is accredited is part of all other certification programs that we offer that are language specific. Um, from the very beginning, CCHI's foundational values include inclusiveness and fairness, and we wanted to make sure that certification programs and exams that we develop are for all interpreters of any language. We don't want to have any interpreter wait for a specific exam because none is available for them. And for that reason, we accredited the CoreCHI certification as the first tier certification, the foundational program that allows any interpreter to say that they are certified. And then, of course, the second tier in our program is the language-specific certifications that exist right now for Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin interpreters. I also want you to think of the exam and the program as an evolving organism, because we don't develop exam once and for all. We continuously review it and report its performance to our accrediting body, and then we adjust and change and develop new versions of the exams. So the exam I'll be talking about today is different than the exam your colleagues could have taken 2 years ago. So keep in mind that this is an evolving process that reflects how our profession evolves too. One of the important things before we start talking about the exams I want to share is that the certification for a profession is different than a graduation exam, because certification is considered, professional certification is considered a high stakes examination because for many candidates, the employment decisions or hiring decisions are made based on whether they have certification or not. And of course, for our profession, medical interpreters, that is relatively new and is not mandatory, and it is still, the something that we strive to educate healthcare providers about. But in many other professions, and healthcare, allied health professionals are among them, certification is a prerequisite for being hired to practice that profession. In other words, there are no nurses who practice nursing if they're not certified or licensed. So CCHI's exams belong to the same level of complexity, and for that reason, they have to follow the same processes that other professions follow when they develop their certification exams. The integrity and validity of our exams are critical, and because of that, they need to be based not on what I think should be on the exam or what all of you today think what should be on the exam, but on some independent national survey study that would inform us how to create the exam and what content to put into it. And that study is called the Job Task Analysis. We already conducted 2 of those national surveys, one in 2010, the other in 2016, and the current exam is based on the last Job Task Analysis. That job task analysis study indicated that the healthcare interpreter's knowledge, skills, and abilities can be assessed in 2 ways: through a multiple choice question exam and through some performance exam. And for that reason, we created 2 corresponding exams, the CoreCHI and the CHI. The CoreCHI exam, or the full name of it is Core Certification Healthcare Interpreter, is the certification in the exam that addresses the core professional knowledge of the medical interpreter. In other words, what makes us an interpreter and not a bilingual? If you think about it for a minute, the first things that comes to your mind is, first of all, we know medical terminology, we know how healthcare works, we know our code of ethics, right? And those are the important knowledge elements that make us a professional medical interpreter and not just a person who speaks Russian, in my case, and can help their neighbor when they go to a doctor. So we know about safety precautions, we know about working with healthcare, but also obviously what makes us an interpreter is we can actually interpret and not retell what we heard, right? Any bilingual who speaks 2 languages at a good level could pretty much listen to somebody and then retell you what they understood. Interpreters don't do retelling. We accurately interpret what we hear. And because on the multiple choice exam, on the knowledge exams, we cannot really test those skills, we do test, though, indirectly the critical thinking and ethical decision-making abilities that then translate into, assisting us with the correct interpreting as well. And measuring these critical thinking abilities is really crucial because, as you know, every day on the job, you have to make so many decisions of how to react to any specific situation. And that's what makes you a good member of the care team, along with nurses, other allied professionals, and doctors. So it's important to recognize that this is not a multiple choice exam that tests whether you read some document and know what that document has. No, this is the professional certification exam that checks your ability to apply the knowledge about interpreting to your daily job. Of course, we do it in a very, unique manner, which I'll describe in a minute. But before that, I want to share with you that if you are not a Spanish, Arabic, or Mandarin interpreter, for whom we have the 2nd tier of examinations, the CHI performance exams. If you're a core CHI certificant like myself, many of you have been asking us the questions of what exam we develop next, what languages could hope for an oral performance exam, and which languages don't have those numbers yet. Ultimately, we are right now have over 750 CoreCHI certificates across the United States. It is a good number, and at the same time, we all understand that this is a low number compared to the fact that Spanish certified Spanish interpreters are over 2,000 across the United States. But as far as languages, you can see the diversity here about among the top 10 languages. And what's interesting is that a relatively new population to the United States, Nepali refugees, are pretty close in numbers to such you know relatively old refugee populations like Somalis in the number, and pretty close to even Portuguese interpreters in the United States. So these numbers change. There are some, groups who discover certification and start actively seeking it, but we do hope that we see numbers approaching 200 relatively soon for each language, because as you will hear about how the exam is developed, we really need to even start about adding an oral exam when we have at least 200 certificates in that language. So what are the important things or facts about the CoreCHI exam? Well, first of all, keep in mind that it is the same exam for two certification types that CCHI offers. The CoreCHI certification, that's the one awarded to interpreters of all languages for whom there is no oral performance exam. After they pass the CoreCHI, they become CoreCHI certificates. Arabic, Mandarin, and Spanish interpreters must take a second exam, but they still first have to pass that CoreCHI exam before they can move to their oral performance exam. So, and for that reason, the fact that CoreCHI exam is accredited is very crucial for us, that we maintain the same level of that knowledge test for all our exams. The exam is computer-based, so when you come to testing site to take that exam, you will be interacting with a computer, not paper and pencil. It has 100 multiple choice questions, which all are in English. You have 2 hours to complete the exam, and you can schedule the exam at any time throughout the year after you get your notice to schedule from CCHI, which means that there are no testing windows. Some test sites are open 7 days a week. In some areas, test sites are open 5 days a week or 6 days a week. It really depends on your location, but ultimately you can plan that you can schedule your exam within a week of receiving your notice to schedule, and it could take as little as 4 weeks to get past this stage of taking and passing the CoreCHI exam. It's a very quick process, different than the oral performance exam. Before I describe to you what the content of the exam is, I want to talk about how it is developed so that you would understand why there are certain elements on the exam. As I said, the first step is having the National Job Task Analysis study that really gives us the statistical data about the healthcare interpreting profession, because to create a valid exam, you need to base it on some statistics, not on the feelings and thoughts of even the best trainers or managers in our profession. So job task analysis study produces what is called exam specifications. In other words, which areas of the professional responsibilities should be on the exam, and what weight each area has, what is more important, what is less important. All that is based on that national survey. And with that document, which is developed with the help of psychometricians, we start the process of developing specific items or questions for the exam and validate them. That process takes anywhere between 4 to 8 months, because what we need to gather for that is subject matter experts who are practicing interpreters, who one group would write the items, and the next group will review the items, and then with the help of the psychometricians, yet another group will construct the forms for the test, so that there are several forms available for candidates, and these forms need to be, equal in difficulty, comparable in the length of the each item, so that objectively one form, let's say if you just sit and read all the question, will take you maybe 20 minutes. The next form should also be the same. 20 minutes shouldn't be 30 minutes, because there's simply more text on it. So that's what that group does. And after the forms are constructed, the forms are administered to candidates, and we then run different psychometric analysis on them and review them annually. And if we see, for example, that there is a question that everybody throughout the whole year got correctly, in other words, 100% of candidates answered it correctly. Well, that's a weak question, because it really didn't help us distinguish people who failed from those who passed. So every year, a group of subject matter experts reviews those reports, and if necessary, adjust the tests. Or there may be an item, a question, where everybody chose the wrong answer. So first the group looks like, did by mistake somebody put the correct answer, mislabeled it, but even though that's impossible, but we still have to look at the item, and we'll look at it and we say, no, the correct answer is correct answer, but for some reason the candidates all chose the incorrect answer on the exam. What it tells us is that the field is not decided of what is the correct answer, because if 100 candidates answered it one way, and then the subject matter experts and the reference materials tells us the correct answer should be another way, that means there is no consensus yet, and we need to remove that item from the exam, so that and wait till the field finds the correct answer and agrees on what the correct answer is. Those are the annual processes that we undergo, and then every 5 years we go back, and 5 or 6 years we go back and conduct job task analysis study, and we adjust the importance of the items or domain types of the exam. So with this, I want to talk about who are our subject matter experts. First of all, because this is an accredited exam, we have to follow best practices and standards by our accrediting organizations. And these are the same standards that are applicable to certification exams for pharmacists or nurses or respiratory therapists, because their programs are also accredited by NCCA. So one of the first criteria to subject matter experts is the very fact that all examination items must be written by experts who are practicing in the field. In other words, it could not be some, academic professors from a university writing those items. It could not be doctors who are our consumers or patients writing the items. It could not be managers writing this. Subject matter experts have to be interpreters who work in healthcare who write these items. The accreditation standards further say that not only all questions have to be written by practicing interpreters, but each panel, every year, different tasks like writing the items, reviewing it, adjusting it. Each of these panels of subject matter experts must represent the population to be certified. In other words, healthcare interpreters and who are currently practicing. And what that means is we need to have in that group of SMEs a good mix reflecting what our profession is. We have freelancers, we have staff interpreters, we have native speakers of English and non-native speakers of English. We have interpreters who work in hospital settings and interpreters who work for healthcare insurance companies. We have interpreters who work over the phone, video, or in person, right? We have interpreters who work 2 hours once a week and those who work 40-hour weeks. So we have all kinds of these parameters that we put in place by selecting subject matter expert groups, panels for every cycle of the test development. And that's why it takes, I say, between 4 and 8 months, because to convene that group takes time, to make sure that we not using the same people, because it needs to be objective. And if the same person is writing question every single time we have a writing item writing cycle, then that simply will limit the objectivity of the items that we're creating. But the main reason for why this group has to be so representative is to prevent undue or disproportionate influence of any individual or group, right? If, for example, our panels will all be healthcare interpreters who work in staff in hospitals in person, of course, then our exam becomes irrelevant to freelancers or to phone interpreters. So that's why we are mandated to make sure that we don't have, let's say, just 3 professors get in the room and write our exam. Because I was one of those professors myself back in my home country in Russia, and I wrote exams. I know how to write them, but this process assures that it's not me writing them, it's not somebody from the outside writing them, that they really come from the field, because the main purpose of the exam to produce certificates who could practice in the field in an independent and safe manner. Another requirement of all the subject matter experts is that they're trained in writing, editing, and validating items. And we do conduct these trainings with the help of psychometricians to make sure that because an interpreter doesn't automatically become an item writer, right? So we do the trainings of our SMEs continuously, and then each item needs to be reviewed and validated by SMEs and must have at least one verifiable reference. And that is very important, and at the same time very difficult in our profession, because unlike other professions, we don't have several crucial textbooks on how to become a healthcare interpreter, right? We don't even have studies that publish what terms are mostly used when patients and doctors talk to each other. So for that reason, our references on the exam are mostly, dictionaries that about definitions of the terms, core documents about our profession, which is codes of ethics. We have 3 published and widely recognized, and I'll talk about that later. Other white papers that the profession has published about positioning, about best practices for site translation, etc. So those are the references that we use to our items. So for every question that you will see on the exam, we produce 2 references. Just to make sure that because we have such few primary reference documents, that's why we do 2 references, to make sure we don't inadvertently allow an incorrect answer. And when you take the exam, you could rest assured that there is always a reference. If it's an ethics question, there is a reference to at least 2 codes of ethics, to specific paragraph which matches what the correct answer is. Where can you find information about our exam? Well, also obviously on our website, but it's a repository of lots of information. So to navigate you to the right page, I want to point out that under CCHI community, we have that second bullet called healthcare interpreters. Kind of is very non-intuitive, but that's what it is right now. And when you click on that, this is the landing page which has all the information you need. Literally, I advise you to click on every link that you find here and read it, and you will have a good idea of our program. So many of the things that I'll refer to are found on this page. Your Bible is Candidate's Examination Handbook. That's the document that has the policies, that has the test content outline, the scoring procedures, the appeals policies, the even in one of the appendices we have sample CoreCHI exam questions. So this is the book that we also update. So again, as I said, this is a continuous process of updating everything. Make sure that you always go back to the website to get your latest edition. Right now we're on October 2017 version, but I'll give you a hint. There's coming an April version where we update things based on the questions we receive from you. If many people ask how to log into something, then we will add it to our handbook so there is an answer there. If people ask, for example, why the scores are the way they are, then we'll add more explanation to our page on the handbook. So that's why there are all these updates. And of course, we also changed some policies, like continuing education policies just got updated with the information about non-instructional continuing education units that we accept. So that's what this book contains. And it starts with describing the purpose of certification and the target audience for our exams. For the CoreCHI exam and for the oral performance exam, the target audience is what we call entry-level interpreter. As you understand, in many professions, certification is the crown of the career, right? It's the final piece of their achievement. But we don't have that luxury because we work in healthcare. And in healthcare, it's important that every person who is practicing from day one has their skills and knowledge assessed, because patient's life is at stake. It's something that is crucial to the safety of the patients, and for that reason, a level of our certification is entry level. But entry level doesn't mean that these are interpreters who are not ready yet. Entry level means that this is a person who is able to perform the functions of a healthcare interpreter competently, independently, and unsupervised in any setting and in any modality where healthcare is provided, with the knowledge, skills, and ability required to convey message accurately from a source language to a target language in a culturally competent manner and in accordance with established ethical standards. If you think about it, that makes our profession as complex as a profession of a neurosurgeon, because to interpret competently in any setting, in any modality, means that you have to be able to function with and accurately interpret about OBGYN, about cancer treatment, do it in person, via video. So entry-level interpreter, the only reason it's called entry level is that they may not have enough experience in any specific specialties, yet they are capable to interpret accurately in any specialty. How is that possible? Well, you all know how. If you're entry level in cardiology, you will be asking for clarification and pausing the encounter every 2 minutes, right? If you become master interpreter, you will not maybe need to clarify even once during that appointment. So that's the difference of how often you do clarification, but you cannot move forward with interpreting until you understand everything, because you need to produce accurate rendition. So regardless of your level of experience, what our exam guarantees is that interpreter who is certified is interpreting accurately everything that they hear in the encounter. So what does the CoreCHI exam consist of? As I said, it's a knowledge exam, and one of the important purposes of it is to make sure that we check not just that you read the code of ethics, but you can critically apply it to a new situation. So most of our questions on the exam are scenario based. In other words, there will be something like an interpreter is interpreting in the emergency room for a female patient who has this, and this is what happens. What are the most appropriate actions the interpreter should take? And then there are 4 options for you to choose based on your knowledge of the code of ethics, based on your knowledge of how US healthcare system works, based on your cultural competence, based on your knowledge of medical terminology. So that's how the test is constructed. But it's divided. The 100 questions that are on the test are divided into these 5 domain areas. And the first domain we call professional responsibility and interpreter ethics. In other words, that is something that the core of what distinguishes us from any other profession and from any other interpreter, right? Because there are interpreters in court and their code of ethics are completely, not, let me backtrack, not completely, but are significantly different than medical interpreter code of ethics. So 22% of the questions are about professional responsibility and code of ethics. The second domain is manage the interpreting encounter, because that's who we are, right? We're there so that we can facilitate effective communication and direct 2 parties to communicate with each other in an effective manner. So we're managers of that interpreting encounter. So 22% of the questions are about that. 22% are about healthcare terminology. It is really interesting that our national survey showed that these are the 3 areas that are equally important to being a competent and successful interpreter. Then, of course, we have a domain about US healthcare system, because without knowing how it works, the roles of other, members of the care team, the overall composition of healthcare system, from health disparities to insurance system, all that is important to legal regulations like Title VI or Affordable Care Act, all these regulations that pertain to healthcare system. Because we are member of the healthcare team, we need to know. And then ultimately, the last but not least important domain is cultural responsiveness, because language and culture are so closely intertwined that it's really important that we assess the interpreter's ability to act in a cultural responsive manner. Obviously, because this is an exam in English meant for interpreters of any language, that means that these are interpreters who interact with patients of different cultures. So on our exam, we cannot really have questions that would be applicable only to specific culture, right? Yes, we understand that the majority of interpreting consumers are Spanish-speaking patients, right? And providers who serve them. However, first of all, we all know there is no such thing as Hispanic culture, right? There are Mexican, Chilean, Argentine. So which one of them we'll have to choose if we decide to go the route of who's the which population is mostly served by interpreters. But secondly, I'm a Russian interpreter. If I take the exam, you need to test my ability to work with Russian patients. If you're a Nepali interpreter, Korean interpreter, right? So we really cannot be culture specific in these questions. What we have to get at through the questions we ask on the exam is, could a candidate react in a culturally appropriate way to a situation that is difficult because of some cultural issue, which is very hard. And if you could have an opportunity to talk to our subject matter experts who write the questions, they could tell you that these are the hardest questions to write, so you don't create something that is not applicable to all cultures and is still valuable, that it's so not so generic that everybody knows what the correct answer is. So when you get to questions about culture on our exam, think in terms of cultural competence, cultural responsiveness, how language and culture are intertwined, but you do not need to think about knowing the culture of a specific patient population. Or, however, you need to know about your potential biases and how you'll have to overcome them in a professional manner. You need to be aware that there is a biomedical culture of the United States healthcare system. That could also be a question about culture. How do you bridge the gap between the culture of a culture of the patient and the provider culture? So this is a very interesting area of the exam from my point of view. So let me give you a slightly deeper glimpse into a couple of the domains so you can have an idea what the questions are like. Well, let's take the first domain, professional responsibility and interpreter ethics. There are several tasks there. Just to give you an example of some of them, like maintain the role boundaries of the interpreter. That's something that an interpreter needs to do on the job. And for that reason, we need to have questions that address that specific task, or the task to present itself in a professional manner. Again, that means that we have questions about that on our exam. Adhere to safety measures, assess need for advocacy, etc., etc. So each of these tasks were defined through the job task analysis. And when we conducted it, we also asked people's opinion on what components of the tasks are like. For example, that maintain the role boundaries, that's the short name for it. The long name is that an interpreter should maintain the boundaries of the interpreter's professional role by refraining from personal involvement in order to respect the needs and contributions of all parties. Right? So that means that we have to have scenarios and questions on the exam about this task. But it's too general to write the questions about this. What we have for us to assist with is breaking it down into components. To successfully maintain the role boundaries, the interpreter needs to have some knowledge. And the knowledge components that we singled out and the survey validated, these components are knowledge of the healthcare interpreter ethics and codes and standards of practice, knowledge of roles of all parties in a healthcare encounter. In other words, an interpreter should know what the provider wants, what the doctor wants, what the nurse wants, what the patient wants out of that encounter, right? Knowledge of consequences if boundaries are violated. It's one thing that you read the code of ethics where there is several paragraphs about role boundaries and impartiality, etc. But this is where your adult critical thinking and ethical decision making comes in. Is you need to know what would happen if you don't keep the role boundary, how it would affect the patient, how would it affect the provider, how would it affect you as an interpreter, and how it would affect the interpreting profession and your colleagues if you do it. So that means that when our item writers chose to write questions about this task, they may pick one of these elements and write a question about them. In addition to the knowledge of maintaining the boundaries, because you have to maintain it, it's a skill. So there we also have breakdowns into skills, applying critical thinking skills, adhering to the interpreter's role while maintaining transparency. That means that we may have questions that will be about how are you going to convey that you have to stick to your role to either of the parties, redirecting patients' questions and requests to appropriate healthcare team members. That's another skill. And so there may be a question on the test which is just about that. What is the appropriate way to tell the patients, please speak directly to the doctor? Well, no, that's ultimately what we need to do, right? But how would you manage in some specific situation? That would be a question. Another example I want to give is of the same domain, but the task is here, adhere to personal and occupational safety measures. For that, you need to know occupational health risks and corresponding protocols and safety procedures, including when do interpreters need to wear personal protective gear, what are universal precautions, etc. Because unlike court interpreters, if you are medical interpreter, even if you're phone interpreter, video interpreter, life has no guarantees. Tomorrow you may have to go and start interpreting a face-to-face hospital setting. So, and if you're stepping in the highly risk driven environment, you need to know these risks, because you need to know the risks to protect yourself, to protect the institution, and to protect the patient and the provider. So on our exam, there are questions about the knowledge of this. That's a weak area in our training. We all recognize that. So for that reason, on our website, we have a webinar about safety and occupational health risks. I strongly encourage you to review that webinar, listen to the recording, review the PowerPoints, and if you are a staff interpreter, you are required to attend certain meetings about safety, patient safety. It's important that you do, and maybe use the materials that usually nurses use to study for their exam to make sure you can answer questions on our exam about that, because very few programs focus on moments where personal protective gear is important, and that could be different kinds, right? From masks to gowns to different kinds of masks, or what are universal precautions. If you don't know these, the minimum you would need to do is ask your colleagues and do the Google search so that you can read what the healthcare professionals are required to do, and then seek advice on what interpreters would need to do. Again, we have an excellent webinar by our Commissioner Linda Gale about that. Also, though, in addition to knowing the protocols and occupational risks, you need to have skills in abiding by standard operating procedures for that specific facility or department, because occupational hazards on the psychiatric ward are different than occupational hazards for active TB patients, right? There could be specific questions on our exams which would give you a scenario like, how would you act in this case or in that case. You also need to have a simple skill, but something that sometimes is very hard for us is asking for information on safety protocols. In other words, as you know, you walk into a hospital if you're a freelance interpreter and you see every personnel going into your patient's room, wears masks and gowns and everything, and you don't know why, you need to ask, do I need to have this gown and that mask when I go in? If it is dangerous for nurses who come in, could it be dangerous for me? So there could be questions on our exam which pretty much test, will you ask or will you just not ask and do something, right? So because that's an important distinction of a professional who understands their limitations and applies their knowledge or lack of knowledge in an appropriate manner. Because for interpreters, a lot of time, our main responsibility is to ask both parties or one of the parties before we proceed doing our job. Let's take a look at another domain. Manage the interpreting encounter. There are 3 tasks in it. One is manage the flow of communication. That's kind of is the most important part for both for us to perform our job well, but also for patients and providers. Then monitor our own competence and limitations. It was very important for the national survey to identify that, because it's hard to know what you don't know, right? And for that reason, we're constantly monitoring our own performance on the job to recognize your limitations and dealing with that in a professional manner. We don't have to know everything. We just need to know how to deal with something that is new in the manner that is consistent with the standards of practice and the code of ethics for medical interpreters. Manage unfamiliar terms and concepts. Again, that's kind of the key of our professional performance, because we don't need to know every word, as you know, in any language. We need to know how to manage unfamiliar terms and concepts. And let me just give you again the breakdown of a couple of tasks. The first one is manage the flow of communication from the start of the encounter to the end by adhering to professional standards of practice. Why? In order to support effective communication. And the knowledge that you need to be able to successfully do that has the following components: code of ethics and standards of practice, knowledge of various modes of interpreting, because sometimes the managing of the flow is not asking the speakers to do anything, but yourself switching from consecutive to simultaneous. That would be managing the flow too, because you made a decision that this is when the patient is crying, you cannot really ask them to stop and wait till you finish interpreting. You simply need to switch the mode of interpreting yourself. And you need to know when you should be able to do it and when it is not advisable to switch your mode of interpreting. For example, if you're interpreting for a confused mental health patient, switching from consecutive to simultaneous may cause more harm than good. So you need to know how you will navigate that in the moment. So all this knowledge is something that you need to possess from day one of your job, and that's why we need to have questions on the exam that will test your knowledge on this in these areas. Obligations to all parties. And the obligation of the interpreter, you really need to have it very clearly, and in each situation be able to understand that your obligation is not to save the patient. That's the doctor's job, right? Your obligation is to facilitate effective communication and make sure that you follow that. Healthcare specialties, policies, protocols, because managing the flow of communication in the operating room when the surgery is done on a toe is different than when the surgery is done on the head, right? Because the head is where you need to stand to hear the patient if they're conscious and talking. And in many, brain surgeries, patients are conscious, so surgeons could ascertain their ability to keep the speech center still active. So where will you be standing? That would be managing the flow. So you need to know these protocols that are expected of people in the operating room to be a successful interpreter. So there possibly could be a question about that on our exam. Proper positioning to support effective communication, which I kind of just example was closely related to this one. Modalities of interpreting, in-person, telephonic, video, because we're all taught how to introduce ourselves in face-to-face encounter, but it's important that when you are doing it remotely, you also have some kind of pre-session, but in a manner that is efficient, effective, for your modality. So you need to know all these intricacies of modalities, including some technical issues that limit your performance in telephonic or video remote ways. The skills, even more skills to manage the flow. It's such a simple thing, right? We all kind of think, oh, I know what it means, managing the flow. But if you start breaking it down, you see the complexity, and that's why you realize that there are very many questions which seem to be on our exam that seem to be asking the same thing, but they really are addressing these individual bullets that I'm going over right now. Promoting direct communication between patient and provider, setting ground rules at pre-session or pre-conference, intervening at the least intrusive level of disruption appropriate for the situation, because not every time you need to stop everything before you proceed. Sometimes it could be a least intrusive level, and that's dictated by the situation. Monitoring for comprehension of both parties. If you interpret everything accurately and correctly, but there is blank faces and there is no reaction that should be expected from the listener, that means that you need to stop, backtrack, and ask if they understood what you said. If they are non-reacting because it's their medical condition, they could be catatonic, apathetic for different reasons. That could be cultural misunderstanding, or it could be that actually they don't understand a word you're saying because they speak a different dialect, right? All these kind of scenarios are important, and monitoring for comprehension is a skill important for healthcare interpreters. adapting to the physical environment, from positioning to the lighting to the which mode you are using, which modality you are using to interpret, choosing the mode and switching as needed, asking for pauses, right? We all know providers and patients who would simply not pause. It doesn't mean that we should stop asking for it. We need to, have certain times we cannot switch to simultaneous, and the only option will be to continue asking for pauses. And yes, the parties may be frustrated, but that is the best thing to deal with that specific situation. So, when is it appropriate and when is not? That's something that you need not only to know about, but be able to effectively do it. Uh, the good news is because it's a multiple choice exam, you don't need to demonstrate that skill. Maybe later we'll develop a performance exam where you will have to demonstrate it, how you can ask for pauses. But good here, you'll be asked to read a scenario, and a correct answer would be ask for pause, right? And incorrect answers would be many other options. Managing register style, maintaining transparency, gathering and providing feedback after encounters, because in some situations that's important for you to grow as a professional, to cope with the difficult situations, to care for yourself if it was a very traumatic encounter. So, and in certain situations, of course, that step is not necessary. So you need to know when and how to use that skill, and working effectively as a member of a team. There are many layers of that, so there will be some questions about what makes you a good team member for the patient. Um, just a quick comment about the task of managing unfamiliar terms and concepts. Ultimately, we know that you need to ask the doctor or the patient if you didn't understand something before you interpret that. But the knowledge that you need to be able to apply here is the knowledge of research tools and resources, because it's not only in the moment, but let's say you didn't know how to interpret the word cystourethrogram in the encounter, and the doctor explained it to you, and with 3-4 sentences you were able to explain the concept to the patient, right? It means that you need to go back home and look up that word. So you need to know what tools to employ. So for that reason, on our exam, there will be some scenarios which will assess how knowledgeable you are, which are appropriate tools of reference and which are not appropriate tools. Techniques for intervening and clarifying. Again, sometimes the most efficient way is not what is the most appropriate way, right? The most efficient way is, hey, what did you just say? But or could you repeat that word? Could you explain that word? But that's not what we do, right? And according to our best practice, we say the interpreter needs clarification, and then ask that question. So it's important that you understand that, on the exam there could be scenarios that will check how are you going to deal with unfamiliar terms of concepts in the moment or after the moment, because that's an important part of our job. And skill in correcting errors. Which errors? And so there will be questions. So all these things that I listed, luckily you don't need to memorize, because we have a good reference to that, because all this comes from the test specifications. The test specifications are published. They're available online. On our website, the easiest way to get to it is on any page, home page, any page. In the footer area, there is that second column, last bullet, called certification resources. And on that page, you have the test content outline and the exam specification. So these are the two links that I listed. Obviously, I don't expect you or need you to write them down. If you go to the certification resources page, from that page you can, and this is what that page looks like. So if you go into certification, click certification resources, you get to this page, you find many resources that will help you to prepare for the exam, including the documents that I just gave you excerpts of. So what is on that page? First of all, in addition to the candidate's examination handbook, I strongly encourage you to look at our one-page PDF called Study Checklist. That document has different links. If you just open it on your tablet or computer and click on the links and read them, that gives you a very good overview. Then we have CoreCHI study tips that pretty much short snippets of what I'm talking about today. And then resources guide for CoreCHI examination. This has like more links to different resources, including regulations about healthcare, HIPAA, about universal precautions, about where to find code of ethics and different standards of practice and other publications that our item writers, our subject matter experts, used to reference the questions to. Pretty much, if there is a resource listed there, that means at some point somebody needed to open that link and reference an exam question to that link. Otherwise, there is no reason for us to keep that document. So it's a work in progress. We update it. It's due for update at the end of, hopefully at the end of this month, maybe beginning of April. There'll be some links updated in that document. So when you're ready to take the exam a week before, open the document, look at all these links, and if something strikes you like, oh, why is it there? Read. Go to that page and read it, because that's something that you didn't know you need to know, right? That's one of the ways of discovering what is it that you don't know that may be on the exam. One of the opportunities for you. We also have a very direct way of helping you, which is called CoreCHI Practice Exam. One of the things to keep in mind is practice exam is not a predictive tool. If you answered all the questions correctly, there are 30 questions on that practice exam, it doesn't mean that you'll pass the exam, the real exam. This is just to give you the idea of what taking an exam with a computer is like. It also is meant to give you an idea of how the questions are constructed and what type of questions are there on the exam. The good thing about this practice exam is that we do give you references after incorrect answers of why they're incorrect, and we also give you a reference to why the correct answer is correct. So you can take it multiple times, kind of a training. You know, any training, you do your yoga, you do your running to train for your marathon. This is the practice for your before your real exam. And the good news about it right now, it's free, and I'll talk about that in a second. Further down the page, we have the mini glossaries, and not many, but they still have they're bilingual, and they also have the definitions of some terms, of some specialties. There are other medical terminology links. They're not exhaustive, just to give you an idea, because even though the medical terminology on the exam is only 22%, it is basic level medical terminology. To review it, it's really hard because nobody can know what you will see on the exam. But the way to go about it is to think of a hospital, a healthcare setting, clinic, public health department. What are the typical types of appointments? What are the typical types of departments and systems of the body? And then just review terminology for each one of those, because the reason the CoreCHI exam is called Core is that it means that it will test your basic knowledge in any specialty. So there may be questions about anatomy, there may be questions about some medical conditions, medical tests, medical some dentistry, dietitians, anything. However, the good news is you don't need to be a doctor to know the answers. They are all basic level terms. Like the term I gave you an example a couple of minutes ago, cystourethrogram, will not be on that exam, because that is not a most common term for healthcare. So, but the terms like lungs, heart, that kind of major tests, major specialists, that's what will be on the exam. We also have here direct links to the 3 codes of ethics. And that's another tip I can give you. a day before your test, read all three. Start reading. My favorite, order is start reading with International Medical Interpreters Association Code of Ethics. It's the shortest one, very concise, looks like very deep, life-changing statements. Very good. So then read CHIA. It's the opposite. Very easy to read, lots of examples, makes total sense, and then read the NCIHC Code of Ethics, because ultimately that's the only nationally validated code of ethics, right? Because the way it was designed and then published was through several iterations of focus group across the country. So it is still the code of ethics that we consider nationally recognized. So by the same uh, at the same time, though, because it is the latest one, it had to condense all the knowledge that we have in a very academic manner, and so it is a little harder to read as a book before you go to bed compared to the other two code of ethics. But so read them the day before you go to the exam, because that may illuminate you and help you on the day of the exam, even if you took multiple courses before that, because it's just one of these exercises you do before taking a test. Um, how do you get to our practice exam? We have an online training portal, which is cchiinterpreters.org, a different domain name than our main website, right? So this whole purpose is to provide some tools for you either to prepare for certification exams, or afterwards when you get certified, to provide some additional opportunities for continuing education. We're not in the business of training. These are tools to help you. They're not replacing other companies by any means. So what you need to do at this website is create a free account. As you notice, there doesn't www. That's why, because it's a tool. It's not actually a website. Remember your username and password. It seems obvious, but I can tell you we have dozens of emails every week which people say, I'm sorry, I don't remember my username and password. Because there's such a high volume, obviously it takes us more than 48 hours to respond to this request. So write down the username and password. You'll make my life and life of our staff much easier if you do. But if you do forget, don't hesitate. Email, seriously. We will respond. It takes us about between 48 to 72 hours to respond right now. Then after you created that free account, you need to go back to the page and log in. The login button is at the very top left, right above our logo. It's kind of small font, but that's where you log in. And when you log in, you will see this page with available courses first, and the CoreCHI practice exam is among those available courses. It has had, as I already said, 30 questions. To get to it, you need to click on the image or the title. When you click, you'll get the next page, which asks you at the bottom of the page to put the enrollment key, and that key for a limited time for the next 3 months until June 12th is add CCHI 2018 as one word, and CCHI is capital. It is case sensitive. All this is explained here. If you read this description here on the webpage, you'll see that code here written again. So it's not something you need to memorize, but after June 12th, we return back to our original fee for that practice exam. It's $30. So for right now, I simply would see no reason for any candidate not to take that exam, because it gives you an extra layer of assurance against anxiety on the real exam. Key thing to remember with this portal is that if you already took at least one course or one practice exam, when you log in, you first see what is called My Courses. And like see here, I opened my personal account and they're not CoreCHI practice, but there are 3 of them. To get to the other ones, if you don't see for any reason your CoreCHI practice exam, you need to go to this little tiny link here called All Courses. Click on it, and then you'll see everything that we have available on that portal, which we do add to, not as soon as everybody wants, but regularly enough. So let's talk about what happens at the exam. Let's say you're prepared, you're ready, you need to make sure you printed out our email called Notice to Schedule. You need to make sure that on that printed out Notice to Schedule, your name looks exactly as photo ID that you have, that is valid. Key here, don't do it the night before the exam, do it a week before, because if for any reason there is a misspelling of the name, or you got married in between or divorced, you'll have that week to email us and new document, and we will reissue you the notice to schedule with the appropriate name. As far as this valid photo ID, it needs to be non-expired ID with your photo, which way you look somewhat this way you will show up on the test day, but also it can be driver's license, state ID, passport of any other country, or United States passport. We really don't care as long as the date is correct, your name is there, and your picture looks like you. Arrive early so you can park, so you can find the testing room within the building. We have different opportunities for testing. Some of them are very complicated. So in terms of, you have to take an elevator, go left, right. So make sure you have the time to do it so you don't rush and you don't feel exhausted by the time you get to the exam. It's common sense things, but believe me, whatever I'm talking about means that this already happened to somebody, and I'm trying to spare you the mistakes. You're not allowed to take anything into the testing room. No phones, no bags, no paper, no pens, no water, no pills, nothing, right? What that means, several things. If you're luckily married like me, and your husband is nice to you, just ask them to drop you off. This way you don't have to store it in your car, you don't have to store it. The test sites don't have, some of them don't have lockers, some do. Call them before you go and see if you're able to store anything in the building. Most likely you have to keep it in your car. The other thing, and it's really serious and important, if you do need to take the pill within the 2-hour period when you have your exam scheduled, you need to fill out an ADA accommodation form with us, which will have the doctor's note stating that you need to take it. Then we will allow you to bring in the pen and the water, or if certain conditions, you may need to have a snack, right? What you will not be allowed to do under any accommodation is to leave the room for anything, because our exam, to protect our exam security and integrity, we simply do not allow any candidates to leave the room to go to the bathroom, etc. So if your accommodation is, if your condition requires a bathroom break for with less than 2 hours, and unfortunately you cannot take our exam. A proctor will be monitoring the exam. Different configurations again. Some proctors will be in the room, some proctors will be behind the screen, some proctors will be in the room monitoring via video cameras, some proctors will be walking in every 15 minutes to check. Whenever you have the proctor the first time, talk to them, ask them how you can find them if you need them, if something happens. The good thing with this exam, because it's a very straightforward, very simple, technologically multiple choice exam, the only bad thing that could happen is the whole building loses electricity. Then you're disconnected from the internet. In order to restart exam, the proctor will have to call out tech support, which they will, and they will restart the exam from the same question where you just stopped. You don't need to retake anything. Everything is captured live. So it's really no big deal, but you need to be prepared to know if the proctor is not physical in the room, how you can get their attention. Raise your hand, yell, knock, dance, I don't know. So you will have about 15-20 minutes to read the instructions on the screen about the exam, that time does not count towards the 2 hours. I'm saying 15, 20 minutes. It just depends on how quickly you read that thing. The important thing is that the reason we put it on and we require you to read it is because it does act as a contract between you and us, that you understand what you're supposed to do on the exam. That the screen describes what I'll show you in a minute, what the question, what the you need to click, that you need to get the proctor's attention, that you're not allowed to cheat on the exam. By the way, you can't, since you cannot bring anything in and the computers are locked to the exam. You cannot access any web browser, etc. But still, we warn you that if proctor catches you cheating or attempting to cheat, there could be severe consequences of you being escorted of the room, right? But ultimately, it also states that if you have any concerns about the environment, proctor, or the exam, you need to communicate it to us as soon as possible, because the sooner you communicate it, the sooner we can resolve the situation to mutual satisfaction. The exam lasts 2 hours. If you're not done after 2 hours, the exam will stop automatically and submit you. In other words, you're not losing it. But it's important that when you're done, you click that submit button or finish button, because that sends the exam for scoring. The extension is given to ADA candidates who requested ADA accommodation if there is specific reason for extending the time. There are certain conditions, including being blind, when we provide a human reader, and because that will be the person reading the text to the candidate, that would need obviously more time, because just normally we read with our eyes faster than if we're listening to somebody read it to us. So there are certain conditions which would allow you to add the time, but all that needs to be assessed and communicated with CCHI at least 45 days before you schedule your exam. So at the test time when you arrive, no accommodations are provided if they have not been granted before. On the screen, you will have a timer that will show you how much time is left, right? So that's why you're not needed. You don't need your phone. You don't need your big iPhone, iWatch, and all those other wearables. They're not allowed in the room. You'll have a timer. You may mark a question or skip it. You can, for example, answer the question, but something says, you know what, I'm not sure if it's A or B, let me mark it. Then when you're done with the whole exam, you can go back to it. I advise you to mark and not skip. You can also skip, simply click next and then go back to that question. But if for some reason you ran out of time, or you only have 5 minutes left, all questions that you skipped are marked as incorrect. All questions that you at least put something there and marked for further review, for later review, then you may get, by luck, some points on them. So don't skip, mark instead, and I'll show you how to do it in a second. You may change the font size or by clicking the font button. I'll again show you what the button looks like so that you can have font comfortable for you. It is truly, the enlargement is pretty big. It's only if you're, clinically diagnosed as low vision or blind that you need that separate accommodation of a human reader. Otherwise, you can just enlarge the font. At the end of the exam, if you have the time, you can go back and review all your answers or the questions that you just marked. The average time, again, it's kind of more empirical. We didn't do the research on it, but it takes about an hour and 20 minutes to really complete the exam. There are people who pass it with taking all 2 hours. So it's nothing to worry about. But in general, what I want to say is the exam is built so you can comfortably read everything and have the opportunity to review some questions. If you experience any IT issues, call the attention of the proctor immediately. If, for example, the question you click next and it doesn't move, most likely that means that something's wrong with that test site internet at that moment. I can tell you that happens for the CoreCHI exam in less than 1% of times, because again, I don't want to say 100% just because it's life and things could happen, but it's very rare that there are any IT issues there. This is what the screen looks like when you take the exam. So here is your timer, right? Shows you 1 hour, 21 minutes left. These are the radial buttons where you select your options to the question. So you read the question and you select A, B, C, or D. Just one option is correct. The remaining number of questions, meaning that you answered 3 and you have 97 left. And here are these different buttons that tell you what you did to question 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. You can obviously guess, but here is the legend. So red means that you skipped that question and it's unanswered. Green means you answered it. Exclamation mark means that you marked it, but you still didn't answer it. What you need to do is that blue thing, mark and answer. So answer and then click mark. How do you do that? Here is the bottom bar. Right below the question, you have the button for the font to enlarge it. There's a calculator. Obviously, we don't have any math problems. It's just a system that had it. Then that button will help you mark the question. So choose some answer, even if you're not 100% sure, put something in, then mark, and then click next. And when you're done with reviewing and comfortable, then you click finish so that the test could be submitted right at that time. Otherwise, you'll have to wait till 2 hours expires, then the test will submit automatically. And what happens after you click the button finish is that there is a pop-up window which tells you call the proctor. Well, usually by that time, proctors are kind of picking in your room already anyway. They know that 2 hours expired. So the proctor will do their magic, put in their password, and they will print your score report. And you will know right there if you passed the exam or not. If you have any questions, you need to submit them in writing to CCHI within 5 days to our email info@cchicertification.org. That's the email we show on that instruction screen. It's in our candidate's handbook. Because why do we require it in writing? To be fair to all candidates, because and to be fair to our staff that can review your questions in a measured manner, making sure that we address all possible issues. So how do we score the exam? The good thing about multiple choice, it's called objective testing, because the scoring is objective because it's done by software, not humans. Humans can have subjective attitudes. Software just knows that the subject matter experts pretty much 3 times looked over that questions minimally and decided that A is the correct answer, and that's what the software knows. And if you marked A, you get a point, or whatever points we assign to that. If you answered B, you don't get that points. It's very simple. The exam is straightforward. There's one correct answer. If you didn't choose the incorrect answer, if you chose the incorrect answer, you're simply given 0. You're not penalized or given something like half a point. We don't have that. All the scores are weighted according to our proprietary formula that I cannot share with you, unfortunately. And then to make life more complicated, they are scaled to the distribution between 300 and 600. So if you answered all questions correctly, you'll get a 600 score. We have not seen one candidate yet. We had very close, if in 590s, but nobody did 600. Doesn't mean you won't be the next one. And the passing score is 450. The beauty of the certification exam is not what the score is if you hit 450, that means you're competent, and that's what our program kind of tells to the public, to your employers, to patients, that a certified interpreter is competent to do the job. So if you hit 450, you are able to do the job. Don't worry if you got 451 when you thought you'll get 590. Don't worry about that. In real life, you're an excellent professional. This is exam, different scenarios, different environment. 450 is what you need to go for. Each domain has different weight, and there are different questions in each domain. You need to answer some questions in each domain to pass the exam. So ultimately, I cannot tell you how many questions you need to get correctly out of 100. What you get if you pass is your score, and the breakdown. If you fail, you do the same thing. Here is a completely imaginary score report for Johnny Appleseed, who failed, and that's what you see first. The passing score is 450, your score is 109, you fail. Then we give slightly more information. In other words, breakdown by domains. Domain 1, 5%, right? Domain 2, domain 3, and all these domains are marked for you. Again, I cannot tell you how many percents are good per domain. It is just an indication to you which areas you need to study and review maybe in more depth if you choose to retake the exam compared to other areas. But at the same time, most of the time we have candidates who are very close to passing, right? We have candidates who fail at 449, right? That's the I always am very sad about this because it could be just the nerves. And in this case, your score report unfortunately won't be able to tell you where the mistakes are. It's because you are very close to passing. Only individuals who have scores which are far from 450 will get a really good diagnostic things. But here we state so that you at the same time understand that each take of your exam is a different experience. So the exam is scored on its totality. So even though we give you these breakdowns, we don't guarantee that if you study next time, let's say cultural responsiveness, you will get the same scores on the other domains and cultural responsiveness improves. You need to prepare and review everything again if you take the exam. Um, you have to wait 90 days from the original date of the exam. That's done for two reasons. A, to give you the opportunity to really study and prepare, but B is also to preserve the integrity of our process. We want every candidate, because if we allow you to take the exam tomorrow, it will be as if we prepped you, right? We give you one day, then the next day you come and you take it. That's not a very serious way of testing your abilities on the job. That will be more like doing some crush training, like doping for the athletes. So for that reason, you have to wait 90 days. If you fail, you'll have to pay the fee again, because your fee goes to for us to pay our test sites, to pay our testing companies. So we need to get your fee again if you're retaking it. Our policies allow you to have only 3 takes within 1 year, your original one and 2 retakes, and you have to wait, and then you do it. Again, anecdotally, I can tell you that candidates who choose to retake, so far we have only, for this exam, maybe only 3 retakes. Then either candidate choose not to retake again or they pass. And as I said, if you have the concerns, you need to put them in writing to CCHI. This webinar was recorded, so it will be available along with all other webinars that you can find. We have on our website under the Stay Informed tab. You'll get to CCHI webinars, and that's where we have our recordings and PowerPoint slides. Because we're talking about CoreCHI, and by the names I see that some of you are CoreCHI recipients, it seems that the majority are going to move on then to CHI Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin, but I see some of the names which show me that you are like myself, a CoreCHI certificate. I want to let you know that we have scholarship opportunities twice a year. Spring cycle and fall cycle, we will award up to 4 full scholarship. And to get that scholarship, you will need to submit an application and write an essay. And you have, unfortunately, to do it before you started the process. So, but if you know any friends, make sure that they are aware of that. in a week in April, we start our spring cycle, where on our homepage on the website there will be announcement about how to submit an application for the scholarship. We also have a special opportunity if you're already certified with some other entity. If you're a court interpreter who is certified at state or federal level, if you're certified by the state of Washington, if you're certified by NBCMI, if you're a certified translator, in other words, if you're like a linguist with a certification relating to interpreting and translation, we recognize that getting CCHI certification is an additional step for you, and we want to reward you at least financially. In your case, we waive your application fee, which is $35, and the cost of the CoreCHI exam becomes $150 instead of $175. To get that fee, you need to email us at apply@CCHI certification and attach your other certification certificate. And then we will send you instructions on how to proceed. So I also want you to follow us on social media, because if you are with us for the certification in Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin, that's where you will know about the next webinar, which will be next week at the same time, about tips of passing the oral exam. But also, if on our social media, we have a lot of information about healthcare interpreting, language access issues, about training, events available to us. So please stay active. To get to find us, you can either do search for CCHI within these platforms, or from any of our pages, click on one of these icons for LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, or to look for us on Instagram, and you get to our pages. With that, I'm going to stop the recording, and we will have questions.